Shalom, shalom. Welcome back to Jerusalem. Good to be learning with you again. My name is Michael Lawrence. This week we're learning Parashat Mishpatim, the Torah portion of Mishpatim, translated as ordinances. I just want to point out to you this beautiful sunset here this evening in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel. Decided this week to film outside and share this beauty, God's beauty, with you all. It's good that we're together. The Torah portion starts this week as follows. We're in the book of Exodus, chapter 22, verse 1. Ve'ele ha-mishpatim asher tasim lifneihem. God is talking to Moses and saying, these are the ordinances that you should put in front of the people. What are these ordinances? There are so many, tens of these mitzvot, of these commandments in this week's Torah portion, and it falls between one Torah portion last week, Parashat Yitro, the Torah portion of Jethro, where we saw the giving of the Ten Commandments, the most remarkable historic occasion that we've all heard of. And then next week in Parashat Truma, when we'll hear about the building of the Mishkan. The Mishkan, of course, the tabernacle in which God will dwell among the people. But between those two very important Torah portions, we find this Torah portion of Mishpatim, which deals a lot with civil and tort law. And as a lawyer myself, it's particularly interesting, but it also talks to the way we are supposed to run our own lives, the way we are supposed to relate to each other. It gets down to the nitty-gritty of our relationships with those around us and those in our community. This week's Torah portion talks about individual responsibility, our roles in a community, and it talks about communal responsibility. There are particularly 4 verses that I want to focus on this week that are particularly striking. And these 4 verses, I think, strike at the very essence of communal life, what our communities should look like, and the role we play to make sure our communities do stand up and take responsibility. Let's turn immediately to chapter 22, verses 20 and 21. We're in the book of Exodus, chapter 22, verse 20, and we read, "You shall not taunt or oppress a stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not cause pain to any widow or orphan." My friends, they're talking here about the most vulnerable people in our society, new people to our society, those who are at the edges of our society, or the weakest, or need our help the most. Those are the ones that we are held most responsible for. Those are the ones upon which the way we treat them is measured as an individual and as a community. And then comes the most stark warning of all from God. What are the consequences? Verse 22, "If you dare to cause him pain, for if he shall cry out to me, if he cries out to God, I shall surely hear his outcry." And what's most fascinating is that sometimes we really need to look at the Hebrew, the original source, the original language of the Bible, to understand the true power of the sentence. Again, verse 22, "Im aneh ta'aneh oto, ki im tza'ok yitz'ak alai, shamoa ishma tzakato." It's all in the singular. This sentence specifically refers to us and refers to these vulnerable people, the stranger, the widow, the orphan, him crying out or her crying out to God in the singular. Why in the singular? Because it is enough for one to be treated badly, for one not to be treated properly, for one person like this, the most vulnerable in our community, to be treated in a way that is not right, or not fair, or not just, that we don't lift them up as required. That is enough to make us the community we do not want to be. And in the next verse, we see how very seriously God takes this instruction. "My wrath shall blaze, and I shall kill you by the sword, and your wives will be widows, and your children orphans." This is a very strong statement that we read in the Bible, but it should allow us to take on board the seriousness of this mitzvah, of this commandment written in this week's Torah portion. And when we look at verse 24, we see immediately after the verses we've just learned, the special mitzvah, the special good deed of tzedakah, of charity. And part of charity sometimes is giving a loan so someone can build themselves up, reestablish themselves, and grow. And it says in verse 24, when you lend money to my people, to God's people, a special reminder that we are God's people. When you lend money to my people, to the poor person who is with you, do not act toward him like a creditor. Do not lay interest upon him. My friends, in addition to the stranger and the orphan and the widow and the poor person who's struggling and looking for us to perhaps give him a new opportunity, we must act the way that we want our children to act towards these people. We must act as a community, and we must act as individuals so that our community perhaps follows our lead. We can all be leaders in this respect. And what's perhaps most fascinating about that verse is it says there, verse 24, when you lend money to my people, to the poor person who is with you. And what do they say? The scholars say this is a reminder that the poor person indeed is with you, because when you give, you receive. And we all hope and pray that when we give charity, when we support those who need us most, then that money comes back to us. That blessing comes back to us. We know that this is a strong belief in many communities, Jewish and others, and it's a very, very special thing to remember. Finally, before we end for today, as the sun goes down here in the land of Israel, allow me to say this. In terms of charity, the beginning of verse 24, the word in Hebrew is im. Normally it means if. But one of the most famous scholars, Rabbi Yishmael, is quoted by Rashi, who comments on the Torah. And they say as follows, im in this case does not mean if when it comes to giving money to the poor. This is one of just 3 times in the Torah when im means when. When. This is a certainty. We must be giving charity. We must be supporting those at the edges of society, those who feel that they cannot get by themselves, those who are looking to us to innovate and to reach out and to help and walk the long derech, the long path with them on their personal journey. My friends, especially in these times of Corona and perhaps soon post-Corona, when many families and many communities are struggling, this is a time to look internal. This is a time for self-evaluation, for individual evaluation, and for communal evaluation, and to make sure we are standing by and standing with and performing the special person-to-person mitzvot, commandments, and good deeds listed in this week's Torah portion. Thank you for learning with me. Thank you for being with me. Hope you enjoyed the sunset tonight in Israel, and we'll learn again next week. Shabbat Shalom.
나는 너희의 여호와 하나님, 내게 준 약속 한순간도 잊은 적 없고 다시 너희를 이스라엘로 부르기 나와